Tonight, we interrupt our normal programming for an emergency episode of Signals Over Noise. This is not a weekly briefing. This is not a deep dive. This is a breaking event that could reshape the international system. As of today, the United States, Israel, and Iran are engaged in active military operations. Explosions have been reported across Iran. Missile attacks have been launched toward Israel. U.S. forces in the region have begun combat operations. For weeks, we have watched the signals, embassy evacuations, aircraft deployments, and military repositioning across the Middle East. Tonight, those signals have turned into action. This episode is about separating signals from noise in the first hours of a major conflict. Right now, information is incomplete. Reports are changing by the hour. Rumors are spreading faster than facts. So, our goal tonight is simple. We will focus only on what is confirmed. We will explain what it means, and we will identify the signals that will determine whether this becomes a limited campaign or a regional war. Because in moments like this, clarity matters more than speed, and understanding matters more than opinion. This is Signals Over Noise, emergency episode War with Iran. Here is what we know right now based on confirmed reporting from regional sources and official statements. Early this morning at approximately 8 a.m. local time in the Middle East, the United States and Israel began coordinated military operations against targets inside of Iran. Explosions have been reported inside multiple Iranian cities, including Tehran, Isfahan, Qom, Karaj, and Kermanshah. Israeli officials described the attacks as a preemptive strike intended to remove threats to the state of Israel, notably Iran's missile and military capabilities. Reports indicate that some strikes occurred near major government and military facilities in Tehran, including areas close to senior leadership offices. Israel has declared a nationwide state of emergency and closed its airspace in anticipation of Iranian retaliation. Air raid preparations are underway across Israel, with authorities expecting missile and drone attacks in response. The operation is being described by Israeli sources as a coordinated campaign with the United States. From the American side, the president addressed the country shortly after the strikes began. He announced a short time ago the United States military began major combat operations in Iran. The president stated that the objective of the operation is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime. He identified Iran's missile forces and naval capabilities as the primary targets and warned that American casualties are possible in the coming operations. The president also framed the campaign as a long-term security effort, saying the operation is being conducted for the future security of the United States and its allies, even going as far as to invoke the future of our children. In a direct message to Iranian military forces, he called on them to lay down their weapons and suggested that surrender would be met with immunity. The alternative, he warned, would be certain death. The president justified the decision by citing decades of conflict between Iran and the United States, including attacks on American forces and support for militant groups across the region. He also stated clearly that the United States will not allow Iran to obtain nuclear weapons. Diplomatic negotiations between the United States and Iran had continued until recently, but ultimately collapsed without agreement. According to reporting across multiple sources, these strikes follow weeks of U.S. military buildup in the region, including carrier strike groups and air power deployments. Iranian leadership has not yet issued a full operational statement, but Iranian media is reporting explosions and damage across the country. Regional reporting indicates that Iranian retaliation has already begun. Missiles have been launched towards Israel and have been reported as of right now, marking the first phase of Iran's response. Across Israeli, American, and regional reporting, there is broad agreement on several core facts. The United States is conducting major combat operations. Israel is conducting coordinated strikes, and Iran is responding militarily, including recent breaking reports that Qatar has intercepted missiles fired into its airspace, and several U.S. military bases around the region are reporting air raid sirens. This is not a single exchange of fire. This is the opening phase of a war between states. At this hour, the situation is still unfolding. But one thing can be made sure of. This war did not begin today, because the strikes we are seeing now were preceded by a series of clear signals over the past several weeks. Signals that pointed towards a high probability of military conflict. One of the clearest early indicators was the quiet movement of diplomats and civilians out of the region. The United Kingdom evacuated personnel from its embassy in Iran. The United States ordered non-essential personnel and family members to leave Israel, not to mention non-essential personnel leaving Bahrain at the 5th Fleet headquarters. And these kind of evacuations are rarely done without serious cause. Governments do not move diplomats and families unless they believe military action is possible. The second major signal was military positioning. Commercial satellite imagery showed significant aircraft movement at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, one of the largest American air bases in the Middle East. Tanker aircraft, the aircraft used to support sustained air operations, were repositioned. That kind of movement does not happen during normal peacetime operations. It suggests preparation for large-scale air operations. At the same time, U.S. naval forces were moving into positions across the region. Carrier strike groups were reportedly operating within range of Iran. These deployments dramatically increased American strike capability and capacity. Another signal, probably the most important signal, was the change in political language. American and Israeli officials began speaking less about negotiations and more about threats. Diplomatic language shifted from possibility to inevitability. Iranian officials responded with their own warnings, stating that any attack would be met with immediate retaliation. At that point, the language on both sides became aligned with military action rather than diplomacy. In other words, the saying and the showing began to match. And when saying and showing align in a crisis, escalation becomes much more likely. Taken individually, each of these signals might have been explainable. Diplomatic withdrawals happen, aircraft reposition all the time, and naval deployments rotate. Political rhetoric escalates. But taken together, these signals form a pattern, and that pattern pointed toward war. And what we are seeing tonight is not a sudden decision. It is the culmination of weeks of preparation and signaling. And the signals have become actions. And now the region is entering into a new phase of conflict. The most important question right now is not what has already happened, it is what happens next. The first 72 hours of a conflict like this will determine what becomes a limited military campaign or a full regional war. And I want to make something very clear right now, before we even get into this next section of possibilities in the next 72 hours. The likelihood that this is a limited military campaign is almost zero. I am assessing this as a full-scale military operation that only ends with the end of the Iranian regime. Based on past conflicts and current force posture, there are several developments that are likely in the coming days. The first is continued Iranian missile and drone attacks against Israel and U.S. forces. Iran has already begun retaliatory strikes, and historically, Iran responds to major attacks with sustained missile operations rather than a single response. Israel's air defense systems will likely intercept many of these weapons, but not all of them. Civilian disruption inside of Israel is likely to continue for the foreseeable future. The second major development to watch for is attacks on American bases. The United States maintains military bases across Iraq, Syria, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. These bases are within range of Iranian missiles and drones, and we are already seeing strikes against these bases as we are recording this episode. And Iran has previously demonstrated the capability to strike these bases directly. If American forces take casualties, the scale of this conflict will expand exponentially. The third development to watch for, and probably the most important right now, is proxy involvement. Iran maintains relationship with armed groups across the region. These include Hezbollah in Lebanon, militia groups in Iraq and Syria, and the Houthis in Yemen. If these groups enter the conflict in a coordinated way, the battle space could expand across multiple countries simultaneously. Of all the proxy forces, Hezbollah represents the most dangerous escalation risk. Hezbollah possesses a large missile arsenal capable of striking deep inside Israel. A large-scale Hezbollah entry into the war would likely trigger major Israeli ground and air operations inside of Lebanon. That scenario would mark a transition from a conflict between three states into a regional war. The fourth development to watch for is the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway carries a significant portion of the world's oil supply. Iran has repeatedly threatened to disrupt shipping in the Strait of Hormuz during times of crisis. Even limited attacks on commercial shipping could drive global energy prices astronomically high. A sustained disruption of shipping would draw additional international forces into this conflict. The fifth development to watch is escalation between the United States and Iran directly. Right now, the conflict appears to focus on air and missile operations. The introduction of large-scale ground forces would represent a major expansion of the war. At this moment, there are no confirmed reports of American ground operations inside of Iran. If that changes, the character of this war would change dramatically. The final development to watch is internal stability inside of Iran. Major military strikes can sometimes strengthen governments by rallying public support, but they can also expose internal weaknesses. If unrest develops inside Iran during the conflict, the strategic picture could shift quickly. Right now is too early to assess whether the Iranian government will emerge stronger or weaker from this crisis. Taken together, these factors will determine the direction of the war. If retaliation remains limited and controlled, the conflict may remain contained. If multiple fronts open at once, the region could enter into a prolonged period of conflict and war and suffering. Right now, both outcomes remain possible, and the next 72 hours will be decisive. To understand what is happening right now, we need to look beyond the explosions and headlines. We need to look at the different actors in this conflict and how they are communicating. At Signals Over Noise, we break this down into three categories: saying, showing, and silence. Saying is what governments declare publicly, showing is what they actually do, and silence is what cannot be clearly expressed, or what remains intentionally undefined. Right now, all three are present in this conflict. Let's start with what is being said. The president has stated that the purpose of these operations is to eliminate threats and defend the United States and its allies. The central message from the American government is clear. Iran cannot be allowed to threaten regional stability or obtain nuclear weapons, and they will not be a threat to the future generations of the United States, to the children we are raising right now. While Israeli leaders are saying something similar, they describe this as a preemptive war for national survival. From their perspective, waiting would be more dangerous than acting. Iranian officials are saying something very different. They describe the strikes as aggression against a sovereign state. They are framing their response as self-defense. All three are presenting narratives that are internally coherent. Each side believes it is acting defensively. This is one of the classic features of interstate war. Now, we look at what is being shown. And here, the signals are even clearer than the words. The United States and Israel have launched coordinated strikes across Iranian territory. Missile infrastructure and military targets appear to be the primary objectives. Iran has responded with missile launches toward Israel and the United States military bases in the region. Military forces across the region have been placed on alert. Diplomats have been withdrawn. Airspace has been closed across the region. What started as just closed Iranian and Israeli airspace has turned into closed airspace across a dozen different countries. Naval forces are in motion, and these are not symbolic actions. These are operational decisions, and operational decisions are the clearest form of communication between states. But the most important signals may not be the ones that are being clearly expressed. Silence is not the absence of words. Silence is what cannot be stated in propositional language. In Wittgenstein's terms, it is nonsense. It is moral absolutes. It is ethics. It is religion and the states of it. And it's not that we don't think those topics matter. It's that they matter more than probably anything else. And you are never going to find agreement across actors on those, especially on moral framing. And right now, there are several critical silences in this topic. The United States has expressed in clear and certain terms that this is a fight against evil. This is good versus evil, and it only ends with the complete destruction of that evil. Israel is framing this as existential survival, and so is Iran. And that silence matters. Right now, there is strong alignment between the saying, showing, and silence in this conflict. And that typically means an exponential increase in escalation. And it's only going to end in one way, when one actor is no longer available to continue the fight. That is the signal we are seeing tonight. Tomorrow, the debate will begin. Television panels will fill with experts and commentators arguing whether this war was necessary. Some will argue that military action was unavoidable. They will say Iran posed a growing threat and that decisive action was required. Others will argue the opposite. They will point to the last 20 years of conflict in the Middle East. They will talk about Iraq. They will talk about Afghanistan. They will talk about the human and financial cost of war. They will ask whether another war in the region can achieve a different outcome. Both sides will present arguments that sound pretty convincing, and both sides will leave something out. Because what often gets lost in these debates is the experience of the people who actually fought in the last wars in this region. For more than 20 years, American ground forces operate across the Middle East. Hundreds of thousands of service members deployed, and many of us deployed multiple times. They saw the region up close. We saw, not through policy, not through papers or television debates, but we saw it through the daily interaction with the people who lived there. And we learned something important. Military power can destroy regimes, but rebuilding what comes after is far more difficult. Wars are easier to begin than they are to conclude, and the cost of war is rarely paid by the people debating it on television. It is paid for by the people who fight it and by the civilians who live where the fighting happens. The president has stated clearly that the objective of this war is the end to the Iranian regime. That statement removes much of the ambiguity that normally exists at the beginning of a conflict. It is not being presented as a temporary operation. This is being presented as a decisive war with strategic political objectives. That means the stakes are extremely high, because ending a regime is not just a military task, it is a political transformation. And history shows that political transformations are unpredictable. That reality will not appear in most breaking news coverages tonight, but it matters, because the decisions being made now will reshape the Middle East for decades, and they will shape the lives of the people who are sent to fight this war. Tonight, we're no longer watching a crisis. We're no longer anticipating escalation or risk. We are watching a war with declared political objectives. The signals were there and we called them. The warnings were there and we called them. The United States and its allies have crossed the Rubicon, and you cannot uncross that river. History tells us that wars fought for the objective to end regimes, reshape entire regions, and the consequences will extend far beyond the battlefield. Stay focused on the signals. Pray for our service members and the people of the Middle East. Most importantly, ignore the noise. This is Signals Over Noise.